Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. As a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia, I rise to applaud and support this bill. The health of bush and rural communities is important, where the sense of community is so strong and appealing. I can recall being in Charleville just a couple of years ago and suffered an injury and was made to feel very welcome by all of the staff in that small hospital, and noticed a nurse there who had lived all her life in Brisbane, in the big city, and she loved being out at Charleville. Charleville Parade, I was there for the 150th anniversary parade. Kids running around at night, free, unhindered and very, very safe. The townspeople, properties, very friendly, get along well together. Same can be said of Longreach or Camberwell or many other towns in Queensland, in rural Queensland. So after suitable consultation, the government has tabled a bill that creates one single system for bonded education. That fixes a mess that Labor concocted. Madam Deputy President, the provision of increased places, 850 annually, with a 3-year service obligation to be completed within 18 years, is a very good outcome. The longer period allows specialists to train and skill before going bush. In turn, rural and regional Queensland and Australia will benefit from medical professionals who have completed the long professional development so necessary for many specialties. Now, at first it seemed to us that 3 years wasn't adequate, but then we found out in our research that 6 years had been tried and failed, and 1 year had created none. With 6 years, people just didn't apply. With 1 year, too many applied. So it looks like 3 years is a handy compromise. And 18 years seems a long time to fulfil one's bond, but when one realises that it can be very arduous to fulfil a specialist training area, then we're happy with that 18 years. There were measures at first then that seemed, Madam Acting Deputy President, at first to be impractical, yet this bill covers for the many varied circumstances across our diverse and large nation. We know that governments have tried, as I said, 5-year service, and that deterred doctors. 1 year caused a flood. 3 years seems a handy compromise. One of our concerns, Madam Acting Deputy President, is that medical colleges are aiming to maintain high fees for specialists, and that minimises enrolments. They choke down on the number of specialists that can emerge. For example, 4 to 6 dermatologists each year. And that's why we have an 18-year bottleneck. It's needed to get specialists through. Yet for real supportive regions, we need more ambitious changes to address these bottlenecks. I note that another initiative One Nation supported, the National Rural Health Commission, has been successful in introducing rural generalist as a career path. And we look forward to the Commission progressing next into nursing and midwifery. We like the practical changes, they're necessary. Now, as I alluded to in my opening comments, the bush, the rural areas are inherently a great place for raising families. Ask the owner-managers of the Chinchilla McDonald's, for example, who moved here from Western Australia and love it in Chinchilla. The people of many regional towns and centres echo the same. So, Madam Acting Deputy President, with regional centres being such wonderful communities, people may wonder why the regions are declining. And the answer is easy. Their livelihood is being gutted. Their productive capacity is being gutted. And what's doing that? Liberal, Labor, federal and state governments are doing that. They're killing the productive capacity of our rural and regional areas, indeed our nation. Economic mismanagement is taking many forms. Electricity prices, hindering the Charleville abattoir, for example, which is a wonderful innovation there in killing small animals, such as goat and sheep. Mackay, we notice people suffering from high electricity prices. And it's not just families, not just individuals, it's businesses. It's clubs in North Queensland paying huge amounts for electricity, for paying stores and restaurants that have freezers are really doing it tough, going out of business. Farmers in a drought, a severe drought, are not planting fodder crops. I mean, that's insane. And we've got tax policies that allow multinationals to not pay their fair share of burdens, while farmers, small businesses, employers, families, individuals pay enormous amounts of tax. Tax, in fact, is the most destructive system in this country. I can recall reading the figures around about the start of this century, that a person on the average income of around $80,000 now per year pays typically 68% of their income to government. That's taxes, rates, fees, levies, charges, special fees, and on and on and on. So people thought that housing is our most expensive purchase in our life. It's not. Government is our most expensive purchase. And are we getting value? No. Look at water policies right now. The productive capacity of our country being eroded. Murray-Darling Basin leading to charging exorbitant prices for water. And then we've got capricious federal government acts that hinder the rural sector. These are all driving away people from making a productive lifestyle in these areas. They're under pressure, under stress. So we've got the Labor and Liberal governments over the last couple of decades. Murray-Darling Basin Plan, horrendous, really hurting the bush. Live cattle ban under Julia Gillard's Labor government, hurting the bush. Not just in the north, but right throughout. And then property rights being stolen by the Howard government of all people, the Howard government. And I've already discussed that earlier today, but the Howard government is responsible through its first agreement with Rob Borbidge as the Premier, the Nationals Party Premier of Queensland, then in 1996, following on from the UN's Kyoto Protocol, then Peter Beattie signing a deal with John Howard in 1998, then Bligh, then Palaszczuk Trad, and also Bob Carr mirroring this in New South Wales. Centralised bureaucratic control is another problem, with little accountability in this country. And that means the federal government, as it gobbles up more and more and more of the state's rights and the state's duties and responsibilities, has no competition, and that means no accountability. We need to restore competitive federalism. So let me quote, Madam Acting Deputy President, from Rebuilding the Federation, written by a former Liberal Premier of Western Australia in 1994. He says, "The driving of Commonwealth state financial relations is the state's heavy reliance on Commonwealth funding to supplement their own source revenue. Currently, the states receive approximately 50% of their total revenue from the Commonwealth. That has since increased, that proportion. In fact, I was in the Balonne Shire Council in early 2017 and asked a simple question: what percentage of your annual revenue at the Balonne Shire Council comes from the federal government? And I was told 73%, almost 3/4 of the revenue, and every cent comes with a string attached, conditions attached. So who's really running the councils? It's the federal government. Who's running the states? It's the federal government. The Murray-Darling Basin itself covers about 80% of the area of New South Wales, allocating resources, controlling vital expenses in water, and controlling property rights. Indeed, separating property rights from water rights under the 2007 Howard Government Act. And then we look further. The Commonwealth, and this is quoting from Richard Court, the Commonwealth is using the external affairs power to govern Australian citizens, often rushing to sign international covenants which trample on their existing rights. Trample on our existing rights. These agreements, international agreements, are made primarily by people outside Australia. The terms and conditions are set by officials from other countries. While Australia takes part in the negotiations, it does not exercise a dominant influence. The foreign countries do. The foreign agencies do, I would recommend, is more accurate. Richard Court goes on, "We never see them, we never meet them, and we cannot question them. Yet international covenants dictate to our Commonwealth Government and the High Court and the state governments and the people what passes for governance and sovereignty in this country." As Marty Bella said in Central Queensland, a Central Queensland councillor, a cane grower, and very active now that he's realising what's happening, and he echoed what Senator Hanson has been saying for 23 years, and what I have said since learning of it in around 8 years ago: there is an ideological assault on rural Australia. And this is the result, Madam Acting Deputy President, of federal agreements with UN treaties, protocols, declarations, agreements, such as the 1975 Lima Declaration, signed in 1975 by Gough Whitlam, the Labor Prime Minister, ratified the following year by his supposed arch-enemy, Malcolm Fraser, as Prime Minister. And then we had in 1992 the UN's Rio Declaration for 21st Century Global Governance, signed by Paul Keating's government. And I'll be quoting from this document entitled UN Agenda 21 in a minute. Then we had the 1996 UN Kyoto Agreement, under which John Howard, as Liberal Prime Minister...
Excuse me. Point of order, Senator Pratt.
Point of order. My point of order relates to the senator's remarks in relation to relevance. I may be misunderstanding the business before the Senate, but I thought we were debating the bonded medical programs reform bill, and I haven't heard any reference to the legislation before us in Senator Roberts' remarks.
Whilst I may not agree with much of what the senator is saying at the moment, there has been a tradition in this place, and I've heard many, many times senators from the opposition in particular given a fair degree of latitude in debates on legislation. That has been the practice in this place. As I say, much as I may not agree with Senator Roberts in much of what he was saying just then, often debate in this place goes a fair way from the absolute substance of every bill that we debate.
Thank you. I think call Senator Roberts.
Madam Acting Deputy President, through you, I'd like to address Senator Pratt's comments, because it is quite clear that I referenced and referred to this bill at the start and commended the government on its actions for fixing some of the problems that Labor governments in the past have caused. I am talking particularly now about the core of that bill, which is trying to get doctors into rural areas. We know of some areas where doctors are being enticed with salaries of $500,000, and it's still difficult to find doctors. And what I'm saying is that we need to do much more than just tidy up these errors that the Labor Party developed in their past, impractical errors. So I'm going to the heart of the problem with rural communities right now, the abandonment by them by the federal government. 1996 UN Kyoto Protocol, which I've discussed, which led to the theft of property rights. And if anyone wants to know the relevance of property rights, then just have a look at any rural community in Queensland or in New South Wales. Then we have the 2015 UN Paris Agreement under Abbott and Turnbull, Prime Ministers Abbott and Prime Minister Turnbull. That was not an agreement, just an agreement for every nation to do what they wanted to do. And Australia legislated severe cuts, while China said it would consider doing something in 30 years. Maybe. Meanwhile, we destroy our industry and economy and hand the jobs to the Chinese and others. So, Madam Acting Deputy President, I'd now like to quote from the UN Agenda 21 book that is driving this. Maurice Strong, the Secretary-General of the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, he said, quote, in the preface, in the foreword to this instruction, "There is much to be done, and I look to the new United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development to be the focal point for the massive effort needed to create the new era of international cooperation for the new global partnership that will make this shift possible." So we're talking here about a global governance from the UN. Then we have the words of the manual itself. Agenda 21 stands as a comprehensive, this is the UN's words, Agenda 21 stands as a comprehensive blueprint for action to be taken globally from now into the 21st century by governments, United Nations organisations, development agencies, non-governmental organisations and independent sector groups in every area in which human activity impacts on the environment. And that means every area of human livelihood, human existence. The agenda, it goes on to say, the agenda should be studied in conjunction with both the Rio Declaration, which provides a context for its specific proposals, and the Statement of Forest Principles, which is embraced by the UN. It is hoped that the Forest Principles will form the basis for a future international level agreement. The United Nations and Maurice Strong, who was the head of that entity at that time, that particular part of the UN, has admitted to pushing for an unelected socialist global governance. So, Madam Acting Deputy President, how do they get away with it, with stealing our country's sovereignty and destroying constitutional governance? That's easy. It's easy. It preys on the party system in which both failed old parties seek to grow their parties at the country's expense. So I'll read from here Simone Weil, the French philosopher, on the abolition of all political parties. Simone Weil says, to assess political parties according to the criteria of truth, justice and the public interest, let us first identify their essential characteristics. There are three of these. A political party is a machine to generate collective passions. We can see that. Secondly, a political party is an organisation designed to exert collective pressure upon the minds of all its individual members. We can see that. The third point, the first objective and also the ultimate goal of any political party is its own growth without limit. And that is how they do it. So each party follows an agenda. The leftovers, known as the Greens, are the UN's foot soldiers, what Lenin used to call the useful idiots. And political correctness, following the familiar pattern of the leftovers, known as the Greens, is thus: fabricate a problem, concoct a victim, conjure an oppressor, pretend a solution, identify an ideology to control it all and wrap it in smoke and mirrors, rope in and align potential allied victims, use political correctness to shut down debate.
Madam Acting Deputy President, I realise I've only been in the chamber for a short time, but I have been watching Senator Roberts' speech quite intently for some period of time, and my point of order is relevance. I'm just wondering which word in the title of the bill is he speaking to, because I haven't heard anything about health or insurance or amendments or bonded or medical or programs or reform or even a bill. So I'm just questioning. We've heard quite a lot about Agenda 21, One World Government, conspiracies, but I'm just sort of failing to see the relevance to any bill that we've discussed today, let alone this bill.
Okay, thank you.
Order. As Senator Minister Seselja pointed out earlier, these debates are wide-ranging. Senator Roberts did link this to disadvantage in the bush, and I think the point of order is not in order.
Thank you. We'll ask Senator Roberts to stay generally within the terms of reference.
Thank you very much, Madam Acting Deputy President. And through you, a comment to Senator Watt. If he had been listening, rather than following what happens with traditional parties, then he would have understood that I'm talking exactly about the core of this bill. I'm talking about rural communities that his party has neglected and in Queensland is neglecting right now. Shame on the Labor Party in Queensland. Then they use political correctness to shut down debate, silence people using labels such as racist, sexist, misogynist, all in the names of victims yet designed ultimately to control the same victims. In this way, UN policy is taken as the basis of Greens policy. Labor piles on to get preferences, Liberals pile on, the Nats meekly kowtow. Secure property rights is fundamental to freedom, fundamental to survival in the bush, fundamental to the productive capacity of the bush. And yet these are destroyed through ignorance, cowardice and gutlessness. So much for today's so-called Liberals ignoring and opposing the classical liberalism of Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek and Frederick Bastiat, to name just three. When their hero, Prime Minister John Howard's government, was the very government that stole farmers' property rights to implement socialist UN policies. Worse, and I'm coming to the end, Madam Acting Deputy President, they did it in a way that deceitfully bypassed the Constitution to avoid paying farmers compensation. That's why we call for restoration or compensation on just terms. Restoration or compensation from the theft of property rights to go around the Constitution using Labor premiers and a Liberal Prime Minister. These are the things that destroy the bush. These are the things that make it difficult to get doctors out into the bush. These are the things that make it difficult to get services adequately in the bush. I didn't learn about these at the University of Chicago doing my MBA. I learned about it studying the climate scam that led to unravelling the UN's agenda to undermine fundamentals of democratic government and Australian values, something the Labor Party doesn't stand up to proudly on. I have made a list of 8 keys to human progress. First of all is freedom, going backwards. Rule of law, going backwards as statutes replace common law. Third, constitutional succession, going backwards. Secure free property rights, going backwards. Honest, efficient, fair taxation, going backwards. Honest money, going backwards. Strong families, undermined by family law from Gough Whitlam's Labor government, from UN's unsafe schools. Energy, low-cost, affordable, reliable, environmentally responsible energy being gutted. We have much to repair and restore. While the bonded medical programs reform is heading in the right direction, the tide of destructive economic policies is swamping the bush and regional Australia. And I'm proud to say we need to reverse that flow. If we really are serious about getting doctors and medical services and other services back into the bush to support the people who have the productivity of our country at heart, we need to reverse the flow of undermining our national sovereignty and governance. One Nation is pleased to support this bill and to work with Liberal and Labor parties to restore our nation's productive capacity to make sure that the people right around our country have adequate medical services. Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President.
Senator Brockman.
Madam Acting Deputy